Alright guys, so I found a video where someone finally responded to what I think is the nail in the coffin for the abortion debate. If you haven't seen my recent abortion videos, I recommend checking them out, but the general idea is like this. Even if we can consider the fetus an actual human being, mothers should still be able to abort because of a simple reason. No one is allowed to depend or leech off another person's body in order to survive, ever. For example, if my 5-year-old kid requires a kidney transplant in order to survive, I'm not legally obligated to give my kidney away. And for a scenario more fitting for the situation, I'm not required to hook myself up to the kid and allow the kid to leech off my body for 9 months in order for that kid to live, even if that kid is a full-fledged human being. Okay, that's basically the gist of it, and it's a variation of the violinist argument, which actually takes a bit of a different form, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, I haven't actually found a pro-life person actually be able to respond to this, until now that is.
So if someone needs a kidney transplant and there's only one person on the world that can provide the kidney, is it still in the government's right to force that person to give up a kidney? In the same way, is it in the government's right to force a woman to give up her uterus for 9 months to support a fetus that eventually becomes a human?
That's the violinist argument. The whole thought experiment is you're walking around the streets one day, you get kidnapped, you wake up in a hospital bed, you look down, you're connected with wires to another human being. The Society of Music Lovers has kidnapped you because there's a world famous violinist who's this worldwide treasure and has this debilitating disease. He is going to die and you are the only person on the face of this earth who can keep him alive. But don't worry, in 9 months he's going to be all good and you can get unhooked, right? That's the whole argument. So, and that's supposed to be analogous to abortion, right? A woman having to give up the space in her uterus for a human being. I think.
Yes, that's essentially the argument, but there are a few corrections that need to be made to the argument. Of course, the violinist argument isn't a bad one, but it gives a very specific scenario that allows room for pro-lifers to have some sort of rebuttal, which we'll actually address here. The kidney donation argument is sort of a variation which I like to use more because it's easier to understand for most people and actually takes less effort to explain. Anyway, let's see what she has for us.
What that analogy, that thought experiment fundamentally lacks is acknowledging the difference between stranger and the woman and the child and the woman. Because that's, unless you're talking about cases of sexual assault, a woman has given consent to get pregnant because she has chosen to engage in a behavior that could result in pregnancy. She may not want to get pregnant, but she knowingly entered into a decision knowing that a consequence of that decision could be the creation of a unique, whole, living human life.
Okay, I have two major problems with this argument. First of all, consenting to sexual activity is absolutely not the same as consenting to being pregnant. For example, let's say there are two people having sex and both agree to use a condom because they don't want to get the woman pregnant. And then in the middle of sex, the man does this move called stealthing, which in case you don't know what that means, he removes the condom without the woman knowing and then continuing as normal. Don't ever do that, by the way. I think that's self-explanatory on why. In many cases, the woman doesn't know about it until afterwards. This is a pretty good case in which the woman consented to sexual activity but did not consent to this man stealthing and getting her pregnant. There's a huge distinction that absolutely has to be made here, but that's not even the main problem with your argument, which brings me to number 2. Let's say as a hypothetical that consenting to sex is the same as consenting to the chances of getting pregnant, whatever you idiots call it. In this case, the woman did consent to being pregnant. That still doesn't mean kidnapping the woman and hooking her up is allowed. So if we change this hypothetical a bit, instead of you being hooked up to a violinist you don't know, let's say you're hooked up to your own son, your very own 5-year-old son. That is still not allowed because you did not consent to being hooked up here, even if 5 or 6 years ago you consented to being pregnant and having a child. Going back to the kidney donation argument, I'm not legally required to give my 5-year-old son my kidney, just like how I'm not legally required to be hooked up for 9 months to save my 5-year-old son's life. You absolutely cannot force someone to do that no matter who the recipient is. So your argument is trash because you can only see the violinist argument for what it is and fail to expand upon that to see the situation for what it really means.
So that's actually, when we're talking about that, it's actually like her giving consent and then taking it away and saying, oh, no, just kidding, I'm not going to do that.
There's nothing wrong with giving consent first and then taking it away later. If I consented to being hooked up to my 5-year-old son for 9 months to save his life, I can still take my consent away 3 months in and let him die, even if that's my son that I gave consent to being pregnant with and bringing into this world.
So I think it's fundamentally different than you or me, like strangers, and what we're morally required to do.
But again, think of this analogy, instead of the violinist, it's your own son. Bam, your argument falls apart. Or unless you're advocating for mandatory kidney donations for just people you know, ridiculous.
I would say that's fundamentally different. I think it would be a very nice thing if you were kidnapped and you gave up 9 months of your life to save another human life. I'm looking at some people in this room, you look like very nice people, you may do it. And some of you don't look so nice, and you'd say, sorry, I like you, stranger, but I'm not giving up 9 months of my life.
I don't even understand this joke. Some of you look like you're nice, but some not so nice? Is that supposed to pass for comedy to suggest that you can judge people based on their outer appearances?
It's also different, too, simply unplugging than actively killing. And I think that's a difference, too. Because in that case, you would be actively just unplug, you would remove your support. And abortion, that child is safe, that child is secure, is growing inside of his or her mother, and you're not just removing your support, you're actively going in with a suction device, with a curette, you're going in with pills to starve. You are going in to intentionally end the life of the human being. It's different.
No, these two are not different cases. In abortion, it seems like we have to go in and actively kill the fetus, but that's only because we have to remove the fetal body at the time of abortion. You could technically just, quote, unplug by disconnecting the baby from the placenta, and then if you do that, the fetus would naturally die. But it's definitely not a good idea to do that and leave the fetal body inside the woman, so you have to remove it at the same time. The concept, however, is exactly the same. You're just unplugging the fetus, that's it. Regarding your argument, it would actually be like, oh, you're just unplugging the violinist, but taking him out of the hospital and cremating him is actively going in and killing the violinist. Do you see how that's stupid?
So also by that standard of like when a woman engages in sexual activity in like a heterosexual relationship, and it's she's like you said, like revoking consent in that aspect, would it then be considered pregnancy as like can be considered like a punishment by that standard? Just like
she may call it punishment. I believe Barack Obama called unintended pregnancy a punishment for his daughters at one point. I would say it's not a punishment because, as I talked about earlier, women are superheroes because we can do 3 things men can't do.
Yes, women are amazing and should be treated as heroes when they sacrifice so much to bring a life into this world. Being pregnant and giving birth are definitely some of the most difficult things to do as a human being. But you never force someone to be a hero. Being a hero is a decision someone themselves make. You never force someone to go through a situation, any situation, and then call them a hero afterwards. Thank you to Fireshard, Alan Morton, Ms. Fixit, and Edward Martin, and everyone else for watching this video. I'm glad I finally got to respond to a pro-lifer responding to this argument, and even though it was terrible, I had fun. See you in the next one.